So the next speaker is Professor Kujala from Helsinki, and the topic is auditory deficits and their amelioration in dyslexia. So, right, so what shall we do? Yes, but that,
what is this?
That will move
Forward, backward. This is the...
Just this will go forward, this will go back.
Okay. So
But
there
we're
is...
going to here.
All right.
So is it on the desk? What did you
Yeah,
say?
Kujala, I can see this one.
Yeah. And if it's possible to have it as a presentation, that would be better, but let's check it out. How it looks.
As a presentation. Can we manage?
This works, yeah. No.
Let's hope.
Let's hope. Yes.
You're welcome.
Okay, good afternoon everybody, and thanks Yuri for inviting me here. So I will show you some examples on auditory deficits in dyslexia and how they might be ameliorated. So dyslexia is a very complicated disorder. There are several dysfunctions associated with it. So that dysfunctions have been reported in various modalities. Not only the visual and auditory modality are affected, but also, for instance, tactile processing may be impaired. And there are both language-related and unrelated deficits. Currently, I think one of the leading theories is that phonological processing might be the core deficit, at least in the majority of dyslexics. The auditory deficits may exist even at very early processing stages, which has been shown with mismatch negativity recordings. And since today we heard a very nice introduction of the MMN, I don't have to go into details, but I just want to remind you that the MMN is reflecting cortical discrimination accuracy, and it has also been shown that it changes after training. I list here some results concerning auditory deficits in dyslexia which have been found with the MMN. So there are impairments in consonant frequency and frequency discrimination, as well as in detecting changes in tone patterns. And also children at risk for dyslexia show deviant MMNs, at least for frequency changes and duration changes. And I will now present you results from our recent study, which was carried out by my doctoral student Riikka Lovio and colleagues. Here there were preschool children, 6-year-old children, 2 groups. One was having a dyslexia risk. There was a dyslexic mother or father, and additionally at least one dyslexic relative. And also these children were poor in performing in reading-related tests. And there was a control group with no dyslexia risk. And we were recording the MMN response in a new multi-feature paradigm, which is good in the sense that you can get MMN responses for multiple different deviant types in the same time in which you earlier got responses only for 1 or 2 types when you used oddball paradigm. And I'll go straight to the results. So here, it's difficult to move using this, so it should be here. So these are difference waves, which means that the response elicited by the standard sound has been subtracted from that elicited by the deviant sound. And here you see with orange the control group responses, and with yellow the at-risk group responses. And here are MMNs for vowel changes, consonant intensity, vowel duration, and frequency changes. And what we found in this study was that there were multiple abnormal MMNs in the at-risk group. The MMN was significantly smaller for vowel changes, as you see here, for instance, for consonant changes, even for intensity changes, the MMNs were smaller in the at-risk group, and also for vowel duration changes. For some reason, no group differences were found for the frequency changes, which was somewhat surprising, since earlier studies have shown that dyslexics have an impaired frequency MMN. But then there are some larger behavioral studies which show that some subgroups are not having a frequency discrimination impairment, so it might be that we simply had such a subgroup here. Okay, so there are auditory deficits. An important question is that whether we can do something about them and whether we can alleviate dyslexic problems altogether. It is clear that reading skills are needed very much these days. You cannot cope without fluent reading skills. And another issue is that dyslexia is very prevalent. It has such a high prevalence, which may be from 5 to 18% in the population. And this number is varying since different studies have somehow had different limits for including dyslexics in the groups. And also it depends a little bit on the language, whether the dyslexia is emerging in an individual. So it's important to find out how to help dyslexics and how to support their brain development. I'll first show you results in our study in which an audiovisual training program called Audilex was used. It's developed by Professor Kai Karma, and it includes no linguistic items. And we studied the effect of the training in first graders who had problems in learning to read, and we were measuring with several different tests reading skills, for instance, reading words. We also recorded MMN to tone order reversals, so there were tone pairs where the first tone was lower and second one higher in the standard stimuli, and then the deviants were such that the order of these two tones were reversed. And we also made a behavioral test where we checked how these children were detecting these order reversals. And the training group was playing the computer game for 7 weeks, twice a week for some 10 to 15 minutes, and control group had no training. And this is now a demonstration of the program. Let's see if this works. There are exercises where there are 2 visual patterns on the screen, and then a sound pattern is played and the child has to decide which of the visual patterns is corresponding the sound pattern and click with the mouse that pattern. So this would be the correct response. This is not really working quite properly. Let's see. Now it came, so it doesn't come from here. So when the response is correct, the screen becomes brighter, and there's also this happy smiley face coming, and every time the child is giving the correct response, an additional smiley face is coming there. And then, if the response is incorrect, if this is now clicked, then the program will show how the auditory and visual items are related to each other. In the proper program, the timing is very accurate between the visual and auditory material. This demonstration is not working very well. in that sense. Then there are exercises like this. So there is one visual pattern on the screen, and then a sound pattern is played, and the child has to press the space bar when the last sound item should be coming. So, and here are the results from the reading skill test. So here on the left side are the results concerning correctly read words, number of words here. And here are the results concerning reading speed, so the second spent per each word. And we took care that these groups were equally poor in the beginning in reading words correctly and equally slow in reading. After the training, there is a significant difference between the groups, so that now the training group was reading more words correctly than the control group, and also the training group tended to be slightly faster than the control group. And here we see the MMN results. So in the beginning, the MMN responses are quite similar, and there were no amplitude differences between the groups. After the training period, the MMN response of the training group had increased. There's a significant difference now between the two groups. And also, if the MMNs before and after the training period were compared, then the response of the control group hadn't been changing, but the response of the training group had increased. So we see nicely at the cortical level these training effects. And here are the results from the discrimination test. In the beginning, no group differences, or no significant group differences in hits, false alarm rates or reaction times, whereas after the training group was faster in detecting tone order reversals. So these are indeed very positive results showing that we can help first graders in their reading problems, at least to some extent. But I think even a more important thing would be to try to prevent any problems so that the child comes with good skills to school, so that the visual circles are not starting. So we should identify children at risk before they go to school, and also, of course, develop good intervention programs for preschoolers. This would then diminish learning backwardness, of course, and it's a better success. Leads to better success at school and thereby to better self-esteem, and which is again reinforcing learning. Thanks. And we indeed did such a study where we investigated whether preschoolers can be helped. This is a study again by my doctoral student Riikka Lovio and colleagues. Here there were two matched groups of preschoolers at risk for dyslexia. The training group was playing a game called Grapha Game, which is developed by Professor Heikki Lyytinen from the University of Jyväskylä. And in this game, children had to match letters and speech sounds. And control group was doing mathematical exercises in the same game environment. Unfortunately, I don't have any demo of this program, but here is a screenshot of an earlier version of the program, and the idea is such that the letters are coming from the top of the screen in the same idea as in Tetris, and then a sound is played and the child has to click with the mouse the letter which is corresponding the speech sound. This is a fairly entertaining game, and it's also adaptive, so that when the child is getting better, then the exercises are becoming more demanding. There are finally syllables and then words, and the speed may change in this program. Training was done altogether only for 3 hours, which is quite little of training. And in this study, reading-related skills were compared, and also MMN responses were recorded for speech sound changes. And here are the results for the reading skill tests. Here is always the first bars are for the intervention group and the second ones for the control group, and the dark bar shows the situation before the training period and the light grey bar after the training period. And we found in this study that the children who were playing the grapho game were actually, the grey bars are not visible, I'm very sorry.
You can guess.
You can guess. So these are telling which are significant changes. So the training group was actually improving in all of these measures. So they were better in phonology, letter knowledge, letter recognition, reading, writing words and non-words, writing syllables and non-words after the training than before training. Whereas the control group improved only in phonology, letter knowledge and reading. And there were no group differences in the beginning, but after the training, the intervention group was better in phonological processing and in writing words and non-words. So nice results, I think. It's understandable that all children were to some extent improving, because that is an age when children generally are eager to learn reading skills. The improvements were, however, much stronger for the training group. And here are the preliminary results concerning the MMN. So here, the first MMN from the first recording is superimposed with the MMN of the second recording. Here are the results of the intervention group, and here for the control group. And in the beginning, the MMNs were quite flat in both groups, whereas after the training, we see that the MMN response of the intervention group has grown, and now it's significantly larger than in the beginning. In the control group, we don't see similar effects, so the MMN remains small for the vowel change. So I think it's time for the discussion. So we can say that there is a widespread auditory impairment in dyslexia, as several studies are indicating. But dyslexia can be alleviated with appropriate intervention programs, and we can also follow up the plastic learning effects by recording neural responses, especially the MMN response. And I think it's interesting that various types of intervention may help dyslexia. Even non-speech training may be helpful, which is suggesting that there are multiple deficits underlying dyslexia. And the important thing is that effective brain training can be given to preschoolers, and that way there are possibilities to prevent or at least to diminish learning-related problems. Okay, I'm now finishing my talk by thanking my colleagues and collaborators who were involved in these studies that I was presenting. And thank you, and I'm happy to respond to questions.
Thank you ever so much. Any questions? Yes, yes, please.
We don't follow that. Unfortunately, this is something that definitely should be done, I agree. But for instance, in this training study for preschoolers, my postgraduate student understandably wanted to give the program to all children after the study, which is, I think, a very ethical thing to do. But after that, we can't say. Probably all children were good then, I guess. But I definitely agree that we should do follow-up studies, because it might be that when you stop training, you might lose the new skills that you acquire.
I also have a pair of questions.
Mm-hmm.
The first is, what about musical training?
Musical
It
training,
might influence.
Yes, and actually,
because it's the same type of processing after all.
Yes, and actually this Audilex training, the non-linguistic one, is much like looking at the notes and hearing sounds and then making decisions, strengthening audiovisual processing. So there is music in a way involved because the patterns are melodic. I think there are studies which have shown that music training is, to some extent at least, helpful for dyslexics.
What about dyslexics that use hieroglyphic writing? What
yeah.
about statistics?
This is a very good question. So you mean like
Like Chinese, for instance? Because there might be different...
It might be a
I
different
suppose
case.
that depends on the type of dyslexia.
Precisely. This is what I also think, but I'm not... Yeah, I have to look up for such studies. This is a very interesting thing.
Thank you.
I want to comment on this. I think there is statistics that in languages that are less transparent.
Of course, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah,
You could probably refer to bigger languages which are not transparent.
Like for instance,
Should be
Finns are doing quite well than English,
Yes, of course.
which is very non-transparent. Finnish has the problem of long words, which is then harming dyslexics. But transparency is very important. How a dyslexic person is then coping.
What about genetic dyslexics? Because there are data that you have chromosome
This
troubles in some parts of
Yes.
dyslexics.
Developmental dyslexia is the genetic one, and actually these results were concerning those precisely.
So familiar language
Yes.
disorders.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, please.
Just a very short comment regarding your question about the different kinds of graphics. There is researcher in Hong Kong, Brandon Wicks, who was visiting Moscow. He's doing exactly this, comparing
Okay.
studying dyslexia in connection with the type of graphics.
What did he find?
I can't remember the details, but
I have to look up. Yeah.
Yes, Jana, please.
And my question is, when you showed us the differences between dyslexic and typical children and American or the oral discrimination, whatever, there was really a very dramatic difference, very nice difference, that we see 4 electrodes, and there was no difference at C3 electrode.
What does it show?
Should I go back?
The main differences, there was variety here.
That's true, yeah, which was also somewhat surprising for us because previous studies have shown that it's more the left hemisphere which is impaired. So I don't know. I think we should definitely do an MEG study with these children and to check out the true dipoles because the MMN is created so that there are dipoles in both hemispheres having this direction. Actually, how they are tilted is also affected when you see the maximum response of the right versus left hemisphere. So
Maybe you accept because we looked at the differential response.
Nevertheless, there are the dipoles, they have a certain orientation, and the orientation is affecting where the maximal response of the scalp can be found. It can be actually contralaterally, at least in theory, but this is something which should be studied with MEG. It is, we can't say anything with just... I agree, and you were very perceptive that you saw it, because that's the difficult thing. I wasn't happy with the results, looking at the topography, but we can't help it.
it could mean that it's compensation is not the right to see it. It's not recovery.
No, but this was concerning the study where we were looking... Oh, you mean that...
That the training affects not
No, I think it was...
less in theory, but actually...
It was this one, I think. That's true. But this wasn't training study. This was the one here before the training studies. So it's indeed, you know, the difference. So this is the control group and this is the at-risk group. And it is smaller somehow. The MMS are higher for the control group, maybe more on the right hemisphere, or the right hemisphere MMN is diminished more in the at-risk group than the left hemisphere MMN. So especially for the consonant, this is a strange finding. I agree. Yeah.
What about the laterality? Handedness, eye-ness, ear-ness, etc.
That wasn't, I think, I'm not sure if it was checked, but I really think that based on results with EEG, we cannot say much. But I think that it would be important to do an MEG study, which is very nicely differentiating the two MMN dipoles.
like using dichotic testing.
No, well, that's maybe one, but
might do it.
if we want to look at it in the MMN level, then MEG is fantastic.
Oh.
And there's a possibility in Helsinki, so it's not a problem. We should just carry out the study.
Dyslexics are often left-handed or...
At least, or
Maybe the proportion is higher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, one short question more because we have to proceed.
Just about this very slide, when you say a sound is discriminated, do you mean it's omitted or distinguished?
No, discriminated between, sorry.
I mean that then the sound change is detected by the cortical system. So, and that often results to also the perceptual identification that there was a different sound.
And is the length of the vowel a differential feature in the native language?
Yes, in Finnish it's one very important feature, changing the meaning of the sound. The word.
Thank you ever so much. We have to proceed, but we can continue in a general discussion. It was such a wonderful.
Thanks.